Welcome to the One Inside, an Internal Family Systems podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Sollenberger. On today's podcast, Joan Ryan and I talk about exploring the integration of IFS and the Enneagram. Hi, Joan. How are you?
I'm good, Tammy. How are you?
I'm doing well. We've been talking about the Enneagram, and we're on episode five of 6, which is amazing and super exciting. I remember when we talked about this idea last year.
I know, it went so fast.
I know.
It really did. We're already through to the third center. Wow.
I know. So tonight we're talking about the body types. And so if you're just joining us, we've done a weekly podcast. We started talking about the Enneagram and IFS integration of these two amazing models. The second episode was on the centers of intelligence. The third episode was on the heart-centered types in IFS. And then the fourth episode was on the head center. And tonight we are talking about the body center. And then next week, we're going to end with higher qualities of type as an access point to self-energy, and we'll end there. Joan and I also are offering a class in March. It's going to be a course. We're still getting all the details together about that, but we're super excited. So get on either one of us, our mailing lists at my website's tammysollenberger.com. What's your website, Joan?
Mine is creativecollaborations.net. Or we can put in the notes for the podcast. You can always email either of us. One thing I'll say about the podcast series, Tammy, is that if somebody doesn't have time to do all 6 episodes, they're about 30 minutes each. I would go back to the second one, which is the Centers of Intelligence, if you're familiar with IFS and not with the Enneagram, because that'll give you the basic structure of what the Enneagram is, and it'll help you understand what we mean when we say heart center, head center, and body center.
That's a great idea. There's also floating around, we did a workshop at the IFS conference. And so my buddy, Sarah, who works at the IFS Institute, released our workshop on YouTube. And so that is floating around out on YouTube. So you can see Joan and I physically. And how long is it? Like a 2-hour workshop? So
it was a 2-hour workshop. I think the video is a little shorter than that. Because of some technical problems and stuff, it got a little bit confused at the end, but it really is a good overview. And it is the source material that all of this came out of, because as Tammy knows, and I'll say to everybody else, this is an ongoing exploration. And we chose the word exploration very intentionally, because trying to put 2 very powerful, very sophisticated systems together is not simple. And nobody's ever done it before, as far as we know. So we want to keep that frame open. And if you come to our classes or you come to our groups, we do a number of different things. It's participatory. It's very participatory, because we're collecting examples and we're trying to see how far we can stretch these connections. And right now they go pretty well.
Yeah. I think that's one thing I want to say about our groups and our course, which I'm sure this is going to be true of our course, is it is so experiential, just like IFS is, right? It's so experiential, and people really get to do some work and find out about their type and their parts. And so tonight we're talking about the body center types, which are 8, 9, and 1. And you have lots of familiarity with the body center types, being a type 9. So why don't you start by telling us about 8, 9, and 1 body center types and focus of attention?
Okay. So my teacher, Helen Palmer, it happens to be a type 6. And when she presented, she would always say, okay, we're going to go to type 6 now, which is the correct view of the world. So occasionally I say, okay, we're going to talk about 9, which is the correct view of the world. And that's not exactly true, but I don't know. I always think of that.
A part of you thinks it's true.
A part of me would love for it to be true. There's no question about that. So each of the triads, and we've talked about this before, is are three types around a center point. So in the body triad, we say 8, 9, and 1, 9 being the center. And if you look at the Enneagram diagram, you'll see that there's a central triangle, and the points on that central triangle are 9, 3, and 6. And so when I refer to the central point, that's what I mean. So in this case, we're at the top of the diagram, and 8 and 1 are on either side of 9. And you could say that in some major ways, 8 and 1 are versions of 9. They're all going to look a little different, but there's going to be a lot of similar characteristics and similar issues that will track across all three. And that's been true when we did the heart center, around 3, and when we did the head center around 6. So 8, 9, and 1 are the types that are most connected to the energy center that we would say is in the body or in the gut or in yoga, in the hara, or in qigong, in the dantian. So it is a type that has usually more familiarity with that real gut instinct, whereas the heart center types are more connected to the energy of the heart, which is also a center of intelligence. And the head center types are the one that we're all the most familiar with. But if you happen to be a 5, 6, or 7, you're really going to rely over much on the intelligence of the head and the brain. So we're in the body center, and some of the things that are common between the three types, we call the 8 the protector, the 9 the mediator, and the 1 the perfectionist. And I'll just mention that the names and the numbers are somewhat flexible. Different authors use different names. The numbers don't change. But when I say that that the numbers, what I'm trying to say is that the numbers don't have any intrinsic value themselves. In other words, a 1 isn't better than a 2 or anything like that. It's just they're identifiers or labels. And that same is true with the names. So if I look at what are the common concerns of these three types in the body, are what does it feel like? If I have to make a decision, what does my gut tell me? One of the examples I use as a 9 is that, as most people, I can do all the research and all of the analysis and all of the finances when I need to go buy a car. However, being a body type, I cannot make that decision until I actually physically sit in the car. And this happened to me a few years ago. I got it in my head that I wanted some specific car, and I was like all set, and I researched it up, down, and sideways. And I went and I sat, and it was like, no.
Wow.
I had to shift gears really quickly, which as a 9, I don't do easily. So it really is, how does it feel? Not emotionally, but sensation and to be in this space. And a lot of it has to do with physical presence. It's why Zoom has been so hard for some of us. I know everybody hates Zoom at this point, even though we're grateful for it. But it's particularly hard if you happen to be a body type, because you can't get that feedback, which we so rely on.
And Joan, the other thing I just want to point out is you're doing this thing with your hands. It's almost sort of like a grounding, like with your gut, like your hands are kind of at your gut and you're pulling down. Does that feel sort of like I know in my gut, like a grounding?
Exactly. And it can be, my gut is telling me that it's right. I do, for me, and I've heard this from other body types, I feel grounded. Yeah. And I won't ever make a big decision if I don't feel connected to the ground and I feel like I'm up in my head or I'm off in my emotions. And I think that that's going to be true again across 8, 9, and 1. So there's something about that. There's something about gut instinct. And in general, there's something around control. that becomes a big issue for these three types. It's really important to understand that that does not mean that any of these three types is looking to control you, or looking to control the space or the environment. It does mean that we tend to be very sensitive to being controlled. So we look out for the possibility of that. And you will see reactivity in all three of these types when constriction or control is in the air.
There's perceived control. Perceived conceives.
Yeah, so
a part perceives something's
control.
Trying to control you. Okay.
Right. And I would guess, and we can follow this in our continued exploration, that if we talk to a lot of 8s and 9s and 1s, we're going to find parts that believe that in order to be good protectors or managers, they need to maintain control. And the other word that comes up to me is autonomy.
Okay.
Like to feel that we're in control of ourselves. Now, that part is probably going to be similar across all three types. The exiles that are being protected are probably going to be different. And we've started to do a little work with that, but that's beyond where I am today. So what I wanted to do was to talk about the focus of attention, which if you go back to episodes 1 and 2, we've sketched out why that's so very important in the Enneagram study. And I want to go through those three because I think it will illustrate where the parts are similar and where the parts are likely to be different between these three connected points. So if I start with 9, which is both the center and also the one that I personally know the best, the focus of attention, or the primary automatic unconscious place that your attention goes, if you happen to be a 9 like me, is on the agendas of all the people around you and the people who you feel are important. And it's kind of odd, but the way it feels is that the agendas of those people trump any agenda that I might, as a 9, have on my own. So if bad example would be one of my kids, because everybody can relate to that. But even if when I was in school in a classroom, if somebody else was going in a different direction, it would be natural to me to follow along in that direction, even if I had a sense that I disagreed. Because if you happen to be a 9, a mediator, you really don't want to get into any kind of conflict in any kind of situation. So you go along as long as you can. And that's a survival strategy. So the focus of attention on other people's agendas is supporting that survival instinct, which is, if I don't make waves, it's safer in the case of a 9.
Yeah.
So what happens is you get really good at reading other people and reading what their priorities are. And you get really bad at finding your own priorities. When I first started to study the Enneagram, they used to say in some of the books, it's probably still in there, that 9s didn't know what their priorities were and didn't know what their choices would be. And it's not objectively true. What I think I've learned over time from myself and a lot of other people is we just kind of cover it over because it feels safer to not state any preferences or opinions. So our manager parts or our protector parts have made a determination that, oh yeah, there's a part over there that has an opinion, but we're going to quiet that part down because it's safer.
Yeah.
Or something like, does that make sense?
It does. What's coming up for me is thinking of some of the 9s I know. I think that, say it's do you want to go have Wendy's or McDonald's or something like that? And I think that if you were asked them in the moment and there was, everyone else wants to go to Wendy's, I think that a part actually blocks that they want to go to. So it might
absolutely.
It might appear that they don't have an opinion because I think a part has blocked their opinion because that's less painful, right? Like if mom If mom and dad are fighting over me or whatever, then it's going to be less painful for me to even have an opinion. So a part of me is just going to block that out. So it's not that I don't have an opinion, and that is that a part has done an amazing job of making me super neutral. So it doesn't, I don't have an opinion.
That's exactly
and I actually
right.
don't have, it could feel that way because the part's blocked in.
Right.
Is that right? Okay.
And what I'm wanting to say to you is, you just stated an explanation for something that I've been kind of struggling to explain to people for a really long time. It gives us language by knowing that there are parts in there, because the experience is, I don't feel like I have a preference, but every once in a while a preference shows up. Where did that come from? So I'll go along and yeah, we can go to Wendy's. And all of a sudden one day, it's like, I don't want to go. And it'll be sharp like that, because I surprise myself that I actually have a preference. It would make perfect sense that a part is coming in and cutting it off for a survival reason or a protective reason. Yeah. Because many nines at the beginning and for a long time will insist that they don't have preferences. We know that they do, but they'll insist they don't, and there's an explanation. So that's why the focus of attention on other people would make sense in terms of a profile of 9 as a mediator. The talent in the 9 is to be able to see the validity in a whole bunch of competing arguments. Okay, doesn't have to be arguments, but if you have a bunch of different options and they have different priorities, the talent in the 9 is to be able to pick out the most salient, valent pieces in each one, which also makes it difficult to take a position because you can see what's right. So sometimes people refer to the 9s as kind of the glue to the universe, because one of the things we can do is we can sort of step into the profile of all the other types. Like, I know that the Enneagram is a holistic system. I know theoretically that there have to be parts of all 9 types in all of us. And I believe that I've been doing this 30 years and I've seen it borne out a million times. But from my 9 profile, I can actually feel those places in myself if I paid enough attention. And that's the talent of the type. Get you into a lot of trouble, but that's the talent.
I love it. It's the talent of the type. I think we should think about that. Talent of the type.
Right,
yeah,
I'm
let's
writing
write that
down.
The talent of the type.
Okay, so all of that is important to know because, as I said before, 8 and 1 are going to be versions of this. So if I go to the right, if I'm looking at the diagram, I get the version of 9 that we call Perfectionist, which is the type 1. And what happens there is that rather than the focus of attention being on what other people want or prioritize, the focus of attention there goes to evaluating any given situation, person, thing, whatever, as correct or incorrect, error or mistake, correct or mistake. And what happens in that situation is that automatic unconscious focusing gives them a very narrow view screen if they're not careful, because it's fine determinations between what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah.
Now, the funny thing here is that it is not an objective right and wrong.
Right.
Because, and here's an Enneagram joke, such as it is, that if you took 6 type 1s and put them in front of you and asked them the exact correct way to do something specific, you would get as many different answers as you had people there, because the standard of what's right and what's wrong is being generated from inside of that person. So in IFS terms, what that means is there are parts in there that are evaluating and comparing and trying to figure out, is this right or is this wrong? And then there are further parts and protectors that come in and, I believe, and say, that's the most important thing, right or wrong. mistake or correct, something like that. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
It does. And I'm sort of curious if you have an idea about, thinking of how those parts were, it kind of got on the scene, like what it was about someone's childhood that they needed to,
I think it goes, sorry, I interrupted you. I think it goes back to the common concern that all three of these types have that I said before, which is that they're trying to control themselves and they're trying to make sure that they are not controlled. So the kind of, the strategy, if you were a 9 like me, was, to blend in and not make waves. And that way you didn't get noticed and nobody would try to control you. If you happen to be a 1, what's most commonly described as a childhood experience is that they felt like things were out of control or that there was chaos around them. And therefore, they had to they had to control their own environment. Sorry, I just lost a word there. In order to make a space that felt safe enough.
Right. Well, so if something's right or wrong, there does seem to feel some safety in this, right? This is right. This is wrong. I feel safe because I've decided this is right. And so there's some sense of control, controlling and controlling my atmosphere where I'm like, okay, this is right. Or this is wrong.
And, so and actually, if you talk to enough 1s, you'll find a number of them who can even describe situations where they would go and make order out of a physically chaotic situation, like sit down and organize the dolls on the shelf or the toys in the box, or physically do that to feel like they had control of something. I think to deflect the discomfort or the pain of feeling chaos around.
Yeah.
Something like that. So it is control. Yeah. And it is tight control sometimes, but it's coming out of a survival mechanism.
Well, think about that with the dolls, right? So the dolls you could then have a part that say, here's a right way to organize the dolls. It can turn into that. Here's the right way to organize the dolls. Here's the right way to do this. Here's the right way to do that.
And when I see it done in the correct way, that creates a sense of safety and protection.
Yes.
There it is. I used to,
that's good.
My mother-in-law was probably a type 1. And I remember being startled. This is before I knew the Enneagram. I went to visit her house one day and I opened the pantry door and everything was lined up in alphabetical order and by size and all of this. And I'd never seen anything like that before. And my husband said to me, if you take something out of there, make sure you put it back in the right place because this is really important to her. And I, at the time I thought it was silly, but now I understand. And I know a little bit about her background. That's how she controlled her environment. And her parts likely were telling her, this is a way to create a feeling of safety and control for me.
That's good. Yeah. Right. So then we would ask those parts, right? The part that is doing that needs those cans to be like that, and sort of unblending from that. Cause I'm sure that feels like her, right? Are those parts that do that for people. If you're an Enneagram 1 and you have parts that are similar, you probably feel like those parts are you. So we would definitely encourage you to begin unblending and getting space from those parts and friending those parts and finding out what they're concerned would happen if they didn't do that.
Right. Well, and because of the way that we know IFS works, those parts have to be honored and accepted and valued because they have a really good reason. Now, maybe they're stuck in the past, or maybe they're not. Maybe we have to update them. But we can't, it makes me feel bad that I probably laughed when I saw that cabinet because I just didn't understand. And I'd never seen that before.
Yeah.
So that's the 1.
Yeah. I just want to say that I think that I love that you said that because I think it's so important for us to realize that our parts are working so hard for us and they have, as we know, right, there's no bad parts. They always have good intentions. And I think sometimes maybe a part of me as I talk about IFS, sometimes I'm like, we got to all right, here's the part. It's doing something wrong. It's got to start doing it different. We can sort of have this languaging around it instead of being like, this part has great information and really good reason why it's did it and why it's still doing it. And so we we just want to be curious about them and be curious about that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. So that's 1 and 9. So let's talk about the 8s. They're just the loveliest 8s.
Oh yeah. Actually, some of my favorite people, my late father and one of my children. The 8 is the type that we currently call the protector. If you look back a few years in narrative tradition Enneagram books, which is the way I'm trained, you'll see that we used to call the 8 the boss. We changed it because that was a little bit negative, and protector is appropriate. But what happens there is that this need to not be controlled, this need to maintain control of themselves gets amped up a lot. 8s tend to be strong personalities. They tend to have a ton of energy. Not that 9s and 1s don't, but compared to any other type, 8s have enormous amounts of energy, and they make a big impact, and they're grounded and solid and sure. And the way that they control is through this, they know what the truth is.
Okay, so you need to describe what you're doing with your hands right now. Your hands are in fists. Your hands are
pounding them. Yeah. This is my dad channeling through me. So the thing that you have to understand about most 8s is that there's a huge teddy bear in there. And I don't care if it's a huge person or a little person. I know some very small 8s who have huge energy. They are, and here's where the parts come in again. They are very, very, very sensitive, and their parts are going to do absolutely everything they can to keep you from seeing that. So what it looks like is trying to control us. And I don't know how many times I've ever said, no, that's not what it is. It's trying to make sure that we're not going to control them. So the focus of attention for the 8, the unconscious, where it goes, unmediated, is on the power and control in the space or in the room. And I'm making fists again, I see. And there's an added piece to this that I think is important. Who has the power and control? And are they going to be fair? Because if they're not going to be fair, the 8's going to take action, and it will look like they're trying to control us because they're trying to go for that fairness. There's a big justice streak in 8s.
Yeah.
Now, if I go back to where we were with the 1s, usually in the childhood situations, it isn't that they felt like they were in chaos. It's that they felt like there wasn't going to be somebody else to take charge and that they had to step in and do this. That's really hard to see and to say, being the mother of an 8. But it has to have been part of her perception as a child, the same way as I'm sure it is with other 8s, where her parts believed that they needed to step up and take control. Yeah. It's very interesting because when you talk to a lot of 8s, you will hear that over time they keep repeating that behavior. You hear lots and lots of examples of, I had to step in and do X, Y, Z because nobody else would. Now, is that objectively true in this situation? We don't know. But the parts sure believed it and took action to protect those very, very vulnerable exiles.
Yeah. And I love that you just said that, because sometimes it's the part's perception, right? So we might not know, we might not know, or we might not say, well, this, so I think that's so important, is that a part perceived the situation to be that way, whether it was trauma, neglect, or just regular childhood, which is hard, so
exactly. And
so,
I think that's true for all types.
Yes.
And I think we need to remember that for everybody, because you're absolutely right. Perception on the part of a part or a child is almost the same, or sometimes is the same as an actual factual situation.
Well, think about it, us
matter.
as adults, right? Like I
Sure.
perceive the situation to be a certain way. It feels that way. It feels like that's the truth to what that part of me who's perceiving it. It feels like that is true. And so I can unblend from that part, and that self then can see the reality differently than that part does. And that's true for us as adults.
That's right. That's right. So we have these three types, and we have these issues around control. And they have like an extra sensitivity to those kinds of an issue. The same way as when we talked about the head types, they had kind of an extra sensitivity to things that could cause anxiety, or things that could go wrong, or things that could be threatening, something like that. So it's not that the rest of us don't have those parts, it's just that they're not as prevalent.
Yeah.
And to go all the way around, going back to the heart types, there's an extra sensitivity to issues around image. How am I being perceived? Am I getting approval? Am I getting recognition? Am I making an impact? And again, it's not that other types don't have these. It's just that if you looked on the priority lists, they would come in different places. In terms of the body type, we want to look for those kinds of parts. And I think, started with the talent of the 9, which is to see the validity. The talent in the 1 is to see the detail focus and to see how something could not, it's beyond, I'm so sorry about the barking. She wants to go outside and I'm not going to get up and let her. The talent in the 1 is to see how something can always be improved. Okay. That's the positive of all of this focus on error and mistake. The mindset is everything can always be improved, even if it's only a little bit. And that's what they're going to see before the rest of us. And the talent in the 8 is to see who really needs to be protected and who really should step up for themselves. So one of the characteristic things that I know about 8s is that they have like a sixth sense for whether you have the capacity to help yourself or not. And if you don't, they're all over it. They'll do almost anything for you. But if you do and you don't act for yourself, they're completely not interested. And it's a very interesting talent. And, I actually agree with it. I can't do it myself. I can't see that. But there's a talent that comes out of all of these things.
Yeah, I love it. So I think that we just want to invite people, as we've gone through all of the heart centers, the head centers, and the body centers, to just be aware of how these focuses of attention are showing up, how these parts are showing up, and kind of where are you finding yourself on the Enneagram map, and where are you finding your parts, and just begin observing what parts are you observing? What parts are you finding in the type, like in your type? Like what parts are you finding in your type?
Well, and the opposite side of that too, Tammy, is if you don't know what your type is and you're interested, you can begin to look at what are the parts that I find, what are specifically the managers and protectors that I find most easily and most prevalent in myself, and what are their concerns? Go and interview the parts. And that may tell you where you are on the Enneagram diagram.
Yeah.
And of course, we've said a million times that typing yourself can be very, very difficult. And most people can't do it on their own, no matter how good the books are, because it takes some feedback and some reflection from the outside. It's complicated. The Enneagram is an interwoven map. And yes, each of us has a core type, but we also have connected lines on the diagram, which are relevant. And then we have some influence from the types on either side along the circle. So this is not a super simple investigation. And for our purposes, we want to know what you find and what those parts tell you when you begin to unblend, as you said, and interview them. and what will make them relax and feel better and understand that we're not a little kid without resources. Something
beautiful.
Like that.
Yeah.
Something
when we bring
like
our
that.
curiosity, right? We bring our authentic self to our parts and to our types and the parts that make up our type, and bring some curiosity and some compassion. Then that's a good place to start.
Okay, cool.
So that's what we're going to talk about next time. Next time, we're going to talk about higher qualities of type as an access point for more self-energy, which is as the answer for healing
and the ultimate
and
goal for all of us. Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
Right. That's right.
Good. Well, it's, as always, it's a pleasure to talk to you, and see you next time.
Thanks for hanging out today. If you liked this episode, make sure you subscribe. And if you really like this episode, share it with a friend and leave a review. You can follow me on Instagram at IFS Tammy and join our community on Facebook at the One Inside podcast. Talk to you next time.